when billionaire Henry Adams III fakes a medical emergency to escape his wedding? He never expected to wake up in the bed of his mysterious architect, Elena. But both are hiding deadly secrets that could destroy them both. Asterisk what happens when two broken souls find each other. Storytime, fam. And this one is dripping with romance, secrets, and one unforgettable twist. Let's jump straight into it. Asterisk, the champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the penthouse. Crystal. Fragments catching the dying Manhattan sunlight like tears. Vivian Cross stood frozen in her wedding dress. $30,000 of silk and lace that now felt like a burial shroud. Watching her fiancé's mouth move in slow motion as he delivered the words that would destroy her life. The company's bankrupt, Viv. Has been for months. Marcus Hartford III, heir to the Hartford shipping fortune, loosened his platinum tie, with hands that shook like autumn leaves. His perfect face, the one that had graced Fortune magazine covers, crumpled like wet paper, the penthouse around them, with its floor-toozling windows overlooking Central Park, suddenly felt like a museum exhibit of their former life. "The wedding's tomorrow," Vivian whispered, her voice barely audible over the traffic 40 stories below. 300 guests? The cathedral? Cancel it? Marcus poured himself 3 fingers of scotch from a crystal decanter, the liquid amber catching the light. "Unless you want to marry a man who'll be in federal prison by Christmas?" The words hit her like physical blows. Federal prison. Bankruptcy. The Hartford name, synonymous with old money respectability, reduced to tabloid fodder. Vivian's mind raced through the implications while her heart hammered against her ribs. Her own family's construction empire was leveraged to the hilt on Hartford contracts. If Marcus went down, he'd take her father's company with him. Long have you known? The question came out sharper than she intended. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. 6 months, maybe 7. You proposed to me knowing this? It wasn't a question. I thought I could fix it. I thought the merger with your family's business would buy me time to restructure the debt. His laugh was bitter, hollow. Turns out love doesn't pay creditors. The admission hung between them like poison gas. Vivian felt something inside. Her chest cracked. Not her heart, but something deeper. Her faith in people, perhaps. Her belief that someone could love her for more than her family's money and connections. So this was all about the money. She gestured at the engagement ring on her finger, a 10-carat diamond that suddenly felt like a shackle. The romance, the promises, all of it. Marcus finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was worse than guilt. It was relief. "I do love you, Viv. But yes, it was also about the money." Thunder rolled across the sky outside, though no clouds were visible. The first drops of rain began streaking the windows, distorting the city lights into watercolor smears. Vivian watched the water trace paths down the glass and felt an odd sense of kinship with it. Both following paths they couldn't control. "There's something else," Marcus said, and the way he said it made her blood freeze. "The FBI is investigating the Hartford Group. They think I've been laundering money through overseas shell companies. Have you?" The pause before his answer told her everything. It wasn't supposed to be illegal. "My father set up the structure decades ago. I just followed his playbook." Vivian closed her eyes and tried to think. The wedding was in 14 hours. The media would be there, society photographers, business journalists. If news of the FBI investigation broke during the ceremony, it would be a massacre. Not just for Marcus, but for everyone connected to him, including her. "Need to leave," she said quietly. "Viv, please, we can work through this. We can know." She turned toward the bedroom, her wedding dress rustling like autumn leaves. "I need to pack. I need to think. I need to figure out how to save my family's company from the crater you're about to leave behind." She made it 3 steps before Marcus's voice stopped her cold. "There's someone else, Vivian." The words hit her between the shoulder blades, like a sniper's bullet. She turned slowly, her wedding dress creating a perfect circle around her feet. "What did you say?" Marcus's face had gone pale except for 2 spots of color high on his cheekbones. "I've been seeing someone for the past year." I ended it last month, but she's threatening to go to the press if I don't pay her $500,000 to keep quiet. The penthouse fell silent, except for the rain now drumming against the windows with increasing intensity. Vivian stared at the man she'd planned to marry, this stranger wearing Marcus's face, and felt something inside her die. Who is she? It doesn't matter. Who is she? The scream tore from her throat with such force that Marcus actually stepped backward. In the silence that followed, Vivian could hear her own heartbeat, rapid and irregular. Sarah Chen, the interior designer who worked on the Hampton house. Vivian knew Sarah, had liked her, had recommended her to friends. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that she almost laughed at the cosmic joke of it all. Instead, she walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. 40 stories down, the city pulsed with life. People hurrying home from work, heading to dinner, living their normal, unshattered lives. She envied them their ignorance. "I need you to leave," she said without turning around. "Viv, I know this is a shock, but we can get out." The words came out with such venom that the crystal in the nearby cabinet seemed to ring in sympathy. She heard Marcus's footsteps on the marble floor, heard the rustle of fabric as he gathered his things, heard the soft click of the front door closing. Only then did she allow herself to crumble, but not completely. Vivian Cross had not built a reputation as one of New York's most formidable business lawyers by falling apart under pressure. As the rain intensified outside, she began to plan. The wedding would have to be canceled, but carefully. The media would have to be managed. Her family's business interests would have to be protected. And Marcus Hartford III would have to pay. For what he'd done to her, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Jackson, it's Vivian. I need you to meet me tonight. We have a problem that needs solving, and I need the kind of solution that doesn't leave fingerprints." The voice on the other end was gravelly, experienced.
What kind of problem?
Vivian smiled. But it was the kind of smile that belonged on a predator. The kind that requires a complete identity change and a very clean escape route. Quickly can you make someone disappear? 3 months later, Vivian Cross was dead. At least that's what the world believed. The woman who now called herself Elena Reyes sat in a cramped diner in Beacon Falls, upstate New York, stirring sugar into coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, and watching the rain streak down windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in years. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with the persistence of dying insects, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. She'd chosen this place specifically for its mediocrity. Nothing about Beacon Falls appeared in travel magazines or business journals. It was the kind of town people drove through on their way to somewhere more important, which made it perfect for someone who needed to become invisible. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Elena looked up from her coffee to see a man stumble inside, blood seeping through the fingers he pressed against his left shoulder. His dark hair was matted with rain and something that might have been more blood. His clothes, expensive once, but now torn and muddy, hung off his tall frame like rags on a scarecrow. "Help," he said, the word barely audible before he collapsed. Onto the black and white checkered floor, the diner erupted into chaos. The elderly waitress behind the counter dropped a plate of pie, the ceramic shattering against the floor. 2 truckers at the far booth jumped up, one reaching for his phone, while the other rushed toward the fallen man. But Elena was already there, her legal training kicking in, even as her new identity screamed at her to run. "Don't move him," she ordered, dropping to her knees beside the stranger. Her hands found the pulse point at his throat, steady but weak. "Call 911. Now." Up close, she could see the wound wasn't as bad as the blood made it appear. A deep graze across his shoulder blade, probably from a bullet that had thankfully missed anything vital. But there was something else, something in the way he'd moved before collapsing that suggested his injuries went deeper than what was visible. The stranger's eyes fluttered open, and Elena found herself staring into irises the color of storm clouds. Even semi-conscious and bleeding, there was an intensity in his gaze that made her pulse quicken. "No hospitals," he whispered, his voice carrying the faint trace of an accent she couldn't place. Please, red flags went up in Elena's mind. People who avoided hospitals typically had good reasons, and those reasons were rarely legal. But something in his voice, a desperation that resonated with her own need to stay hidden, made her hesitate. "You need medical attention," she said quietly, aware that the truckers and waitress were listening to every word. "I'm a doctor." The lie came easily, smoothly. "I can treat this myself if you help me get somewhere private." Stranger's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, Elena saw something she recognized. The look of someone running from something. Bigger than themselves? Someone who'd been pushed past their breaking point and come out the other side, fundamentally changed. "My cabin's 10 minutes from here," she heard herself saying. "I have a first aid kit." It was insane. She'd spent 3 months carefully constructing a life of anonymity. Now she was inviting a bleeding stranger into her sanctuary. But maybe. That was what made it feel right. They were both running from something, both clinging to false identities like life preservers in a storm. 20 minutes later, Elena's hands were steady as she cleaned the gunshot wound in her small but immaculate kitchen. The stranger, who'd introduced himself only as David, sat shirtless on her kitchen table while she worked by the light of an oil lamp. The power had gone out during the storm, leaving them in a pool of golden light surrounded by darkness. "You're not a doctor," David said, his voice stronger now that the immediate pain had subsided. "No," Elena agreed, applying antibiotic ointment with careful precision. "But I've had first aid training. You're not really David either." A smile ghosted across his lips. "What gave me away?" "You flinched when I said the name. Also, your accent slipped when you were in pain. Eastern European, maybe Russian." Watched her work with eyes that missed nothing. "And you're not a small-town local. Your hands are too soft, and that watch you keep trying to hide costs more than most people in Beacon Falls make in a year." They worked in comfortable silence. After that, each recognizing in the other a fellow traveler in the country of the lost, Elena finished bandaging his shoulder and stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been, how the lamplight caught the planes of his face and made him look like something carved from marble and shadow. "Thank you," David said quietly. "For not turning me in, who would I turn you into?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to explore. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up, and Elena realized she'd committed herself to hosting this dangerous stranger until morning at least. "The people looking for you," Elena said, settling into the chair across from him. "Are they the kind who give up easily?" David's laugh was bitter. "No. They're the kind who hold grudges for generations and have the resources to act on them. Government. Worse. Family." The word carried weight that settled over the kitchen like smoke. Elena understood family obligations, family expectations, family betrayals that cut deeper than any external enemy could manage. Her own family still believed she was dead, killed in a car accident she'd staged with Jackson's help. It was the only way to protect them from the fallout of Marcus's crimes. "What did you do?" she asked. "I chose the wrong side in a war. That's been going on for 40 years. David reached for his torn shirt, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "My family controls shipping routes through the Baltic. It's very lucrative, very violent business. I thought I could change things from the inside, make them legitimate. Let me guess. Your family disagreed." "My family sent 3 men to kill me in a hotel room in Albany tonight." David's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "I got lucky. They got dead, but there will be more." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the power outage. She'd invited a man with a target on his back into her sanctuary, compromised the careful anonymity she'd built. But looking at him now, seeing the exhaustion and pain he was trying to hide, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. "How long do you have before they find you here?" "Day? Maybe 2 if I'm lucky. They'll check every hospital, every clinic, every place someone might go with a gunshot wound. Small towns like this are actually harder to hide in than cities. Everyone notices strangers." Elena stood and walked to the window, peering through the darkness toward the road. No headlights, no movement except the rain. But that could change quickly. "I have a car," she said finally. "And money. Enough to get us both far from here. Us." David's voice carried a note of surprise. Elena turned back to face him. "They're going to connect you to this place eventually. The diner, the witnesses, the blood trail. When they do, they'll find me. I can't afford to be found. What are you running from? The question she'd been dreading. Elena looked at this stranger who'd stumbled into her life bleeding and desperate, and made a calculation that would either save them both or destroy them. I'm supposed to be dead too, she said quietly. And there are people who would kill to keep it that way. David studied her face in the lamplight, and she could almost see him weighing his options. Trust a stranger, or face his family's vengeance alone. Run with someone whose secrets might be as dangerous as his own, or take his chances on the road. How good is your car? He asked finally. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in months. Fast enough to get us to Canada before sunrise, and we'd better get moving. But as Elena went to pack her few belongings, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a mistake that would cost them both everything. Outside, the storm was beginning to clear, and with the dawn would come hunters who would stop at nothing to find their prey. The black SUV had been following them for 30 miles. Elena noticed it first in the rearview mirror as they crossed the Vermont border, shadow that maintained perfect distance through every turn and lane change. Her modified Audi R8 painted matte black to avoid attention hummed beneath them like a caged predator as she pushed it harder through the mountain curves. We have company, she said, downshifting as they approached a series of switchbacks that would test both the car and their pursuers. David, who'd been dozing fitfully in the passenger seat, came instantly alert. He twisted to look behind them, his movement careful because of the shoulder wound. How long since we left that gas station in Brattleboro? They're good, but they're not invisible. The morning sun cut through the windshield in blades of gold, illuminating the tension lines around David's eyes. In daylight, Elena could see details she'd missed in the lamplight of her cabin. The scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the way his hands, large and capable, bore the calluses of someone who'd learned violence early and well. It's not my family, David said after studying the pursuing vehicle. Wrong cars. Volkov uses German steel, never American. Lena's blood chilled. If it wasn't David's family, that left only one possibility. Then they're here for me. Impossible, you said you were dead. Who had I lied? The words came out sharper than she intended. Not about being dead, but about why. I didn't just disappear, David. I stole something first. The admission hung between them as Elena took the next curve at a speed that made the tires scream against asphalt. In the mirror, the SUV kept pace with professional ease. What did you steal? $1 million, and enough evidence to put some very powerful people in prison for the rest of their lives. Elena's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Including my ex-fiancée and half the New York State Senate. David stared at her, and Elena could almost see him recalculating everything he thought he knew about the woman who'd saved his life, quiet cabin, the careful anonymity, the expensive car hidden beneath matte paint. It all made a different kind of sense now. 43 million, he repeated slowly. Offshore accounts, shell companies, money laundering operations going back 15 years. I had access to all of it because I was supposed to marry into the family. When I found out Marcus was using me to legitimize his father's criminal empire, I decided to take a severance package. The SUV behind them accelerated, closing the gap as they approached a straightaway. Elena could make out 2 figures in the front seats now, and something metallic glinting in the passenger window. They have guns, David observed with the calm of someone accustomed to mortal danger. So do I. Elena reached under her seat and withdrew a Glock 19. Checking the magazine with one hand while steering with the other. Glove compartment. There's a .45 and extra ammunition. David retrieved the weapon, his movements automatic and practiced. You've done this before? I've had 3 months to prepare for this day. I knew they'd find me eventually. Elena's foot pressed harder on the accelerator as the Audi's engine climbed toward its red line. The question is whether we can reach the safe house before they get close enough to use those guns. Safe house? A place Jackson set up for me. About 40 miles north, hidden in the mountains. Defensible position, emergency supplies, communication equipment. If we can get there, we can figure out our next move. There. The SUV suddenly surged forward, pulling alongside them in the opposite lane. Elena caught a glimpse of the passenger rolling. Down his window, saw the barrel of an assault rifle emerging. "Hold on," she said, and yanked the wheel hard to the right. The Audi's advanced suspension system absorbed the impact as they left the roadway, bouncing through tall grass and scattered rocks. Behind them, the SUV tried to follow, but its higher center of gravity and government-spec weight made it clumsy on the uneven terrain. Elena threaded the car between two large boulders and back onto a farm road that paralleled the highway, hidden from view by a line of pine trees. The modified engine purred with satisfaction as she pushed it through the narrow passage. "Nice driving," David said, ejecting the .45's magazine to check the load. "I had good teachers." Elena's smile was grim. Turns out stealing $43 million requires more than just legal expertise. They drove in tense silence for several minutes, using the network of backroads Elena had memorized during her months of preparation. But as they crested a hill that should have given them a clear view to the safe house, Elena's heart sank. 3 more SUVs waited in a triangle formation around the small cabin, their occupants clearly visible as armed figures in tactical gear. "They found it," Elena said quietly. "They found my safe house." David studied the scene through binoculars he'd found in the car's emergency kit. Professional deployment, military precision. "These aren't just corporate security goons, Elena. Who exactly did you steal from?" Elena pulled the car into the cover of an old barn and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, she could hear her own heartbeat, rapid and irregular. "The consortium. A group of families that control shipping, construction, and banking from Boston to Miami. They've been laundering money through political campaigns and infrastructure projects for decades. And you have evidence of this." "I have everything. Bank records, recorded conversations, correspondence going back 20 years. It's all on encrypted drives hidden in safety deposit boxes across 3 states. Elena turned to face David fully. "That's not the worst part, though. The worst part is that my father's construction company has been their primary front for the last 10 years. When this comes out, it won't just destroy the consortium, it'll destroy my family too." David was quiet for a long moment, processing. "The implications. So you're not just running from criminals. You're running from the choice between exposing your family or letting murderers go free. Something like that. Now they've found you." Elena watched the tactical teams moving around her safe house with professional efficiency. They weren't just searching. They were setting up for a siege, which meant they expected company. "Not just found me," she realized aloud. "They're using me as bait. They know you're with me, and they want you both. Your family's shipping routes, my evidence against the consortium. If they can eliminate both problems at once, they control the entire eastern seaboard," David finished. "No competition, no witnesses, no evidence." A new sound reached them through the morning air. Helicopter rotors approaching from the south. Elena looked up to see a black aircraft cresting the tree line, heading directly for their position. "We need to move," she said, starting the engine. "Now." But as she put the car in reverse, another sound made her blood freeze. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle, followed immediately by the spider webbing of the Audi's rear window. David dove across the center console, pushing Elena down as more shots peppered the barn around them. Sniper, Eastern Ridge, were pinned down. Elena's mind raced through their options. The car was armored but not enough to withstand sustained fire. The barn offered minimal cover. The helicopter was closing fast, and the tactical teams from the safe house would be moving toward their position. "There's a cave system about half a mile north," she said, her voice muffled against David's chest. "If we can reach it, we can disappear into the mountains. Not in the car, too exposed." "On foot, then." David Elena looked up at him, seeing her own desperation reflected in his eyes. "If we do this, if we run together, there's no going back. They'll never stop hunting us." David's hand found her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. "It was dead. The moment I betrayed my family, you were dead the moment you chose justice over safety. Maybe it's better to be dead together than alone." The helicopter was almost overhead now, its rotor wash shaking the barn walls. Lena made a decision that would bind their fates together or get them both killed. The back wall. "There's a door hidden behind those feed sacks. It leads to an old mine shaft that connects to the cave system. Jackson showed me when he set up this route. David nodded and began moving toward the rear of the barn, staying low as more rifle shots punched through the wooden walls. Elena followed him. A terrible realization crept over her. Jackson had shown her this route. Jackson had set up the safe house. Jackson knew about the cave system, the mine shaft, every detail of her escape plan. And Jackson's voice was what she'd heard on the radio chatter from the helicopter as it passed overhead, coordinating the search teams with the familiarity of someone who knew exactly where his prey was going. "David, wait!" she called out, but he was already at the hidden door, pulling away the feed sacks. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Jackson, who'd helped her disappear, who'd created her new identity, who'd promised to keep her safe. Jackson, who'd always been more interested in the money than her well-being. Jackson, who would sell anyone for the right price. As David opened the door to what they both thought was salvation, Elena saw the red laser dots dancing across his. Cheston knew they were walking into a trap that would cost them everything. "Don't move." The voice came from the darkness beyond the door, cold and professional. Elena recognized it immediately, and the recognition felt like swallowing broken glass. "Hello, Jackson," she said quietly. Jackson Torres stepped into the dim light of the barn, his weathered face showing no trace of the man who'd helped her plan her escape 3 months ago. Behind him, 3 tactical team members emerged from the mine shaft, their weapons trained on Elena and David. "You always were too smart for your own good, sweetheart," Jackson said, his New Jersey accent more pronounced than Elena remembered. "Made you predictable, though? I knew you'd run the route we planned when things got hot." David tensed beside her, calculating angles and distances, but Elena could see it was hopeless. They were surrounded, outgunned, and betrayed by the one person she'd trusted with her life. "How much did they pay you?" Elena asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, enough to retire somewhere warm with no extradition treaty. Jackson's smile was apologetic, but not ashamed. "Nothing personal, Elena, just business." "Everything's personal when it involves $43 million," said a new voice from behind them. Elena turned to see Marcus Hartford III stepping through the barn's main entrance, flanked by 2 more armed men. He looked exactly as she remembered, perfectly groomed and expensively dressed, as if betraying his fiancée and stealing her escape. Money was just another business meeting. "Lo, Vivian," he said, using her real name like a weapon. "You're looking well for a dead woman." The sight of him brought back a flood of memories she'd spent 3 months trying to suppress. The penthouse, the champagne flute, shattering on marble. The moment she realized the man she'd planned to marry had been using her all along. Marcus. She kept her voice level, professional. "Still avoiding federal prison, I see. Your evidence helped with that, actually. Amazing what prosecutors will overlook when you give them bigger fish to fry." Marcus stepped closer, and Elena could smell his cologne, the same scent that had once made her feel safe. "Speaking of which, where are my drives?" Marcus's laugh was soft and utterly without humor. Encrypted drives containing $43 million and enough evidence to collapse 3 state governments. "The drives you stole from my father's safe the night you disappeared. Those drives." Elena said nothing, but David shifted slightly beside her. She could feel his tension, the coiled energy of a predator waiting for an opening. "I know you have." "Them," Marcus continued. "Just like I know you've been planning to use them against us. The question is whether you're smart enough to trade them for your life. And if I refuse?" Aquan Marcus nodded to one of his men, who raised his weapon toward David. "Then your boyfriend here dies first, and we take the drives from your corpse. We're..." Choice. Elena looked at David, seeing something in his eyes that made her heart stop. Not fear, but resolve. The kind of resolve that came with having already made an impossible decision. "The drives are in a safety deposit box in Montreal," Elena said quickly. "Keys in my cabin back in Beacon Falls." It was a lie, but it bought them time. The drives were actually hidden in 3 separate locations, with deadman switches that would automatically release the information to media outlets. Elena failed to check in every 72 hours. But Marcus didn't need to know that. "Montreal," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Clever. Far enough to be safe, close enough to retrieve quickly." He pulled out his phone and spoke quietly to someone on the other end, arranging transportation and logistics. While Marcus was distracted, David leaned close to Elena's ear. "The explosive charges I rigged in my family's warehouse in Albania," he whispered, barely audible. "They're triggered by a specific radio frequency, the same frequency these tactical radios use." Elena's blood chilled as she understood what he was telling her. David hadn't just run from his family. He'd sabotaged their operation, set up a massive explosion that would cripple their shipping empire. But the trigger was here, in the radios carried by the men surrounding them.
"How much damage?"
She whispered back.
"Not enough to level 6 city."
"Blocks. Enough to make sure my family never recovers." His voice was steady, but she could see the pain in his eyes. "I planted those charges 6 months ago when I still believed I could reform them from the inside. When they ordered my death, I realized some things can't be reformed." Marcus finished his call and turned back to them. "We leave for Montreal in 1 hour. Elena comes with us. The boyfriend stays here as insurance." "No," Elena said immediately. "We stay together or no deal. You're not in a position to negotiate. I'm the only one who knows exactly which bank, which box, which key. Kill David, and that information dies with me." It was another lie, but Marcus didn't know that. Elena could see him weighing the options, calculating risk versus reward. She used the moment to catch Jackson's eye, seeing something there she hadn't expected. Regret, maybe even guilt. "Jackson," she said quietly, "you know what's on those drives? You know what these people have done? How many lives they've destroyed? I know what $40 million looks like in an offshore account." Jackson replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "What about the Children's Hospital in Newark? Remember that construction project you investigated 5 years ago? The one where they used substandard materials and 2 kids died when the wall collapsed?" Jackson's face went pale. "That was an accident. That was the consortium cutting costs to maximize profit. It's all documented. Every bribe, every corner cut, every life they valued at less than their quarterly earnings." Elena took a step toward him, ignoring the weapons trained. "On her? Your granddaughter has leukemia, doesn't she, Jackson? What happens when the people who killed those children control every hospital construction project from here to Florida?" For a moment, Jackson wavered. Elena could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between greed and conscience. Then Marcus spoke, and the moment shattered. "Enough." His voice cut through the barn like a blade. "Jackson, you're paid to deliver, not to develop a conscience. Do your job." Jackson's expression hardened. "Sorry, Elena. Business is business." But David had been waiting for this moment, for everyone's attention to focus on the moral drama playing out in front of them. In one fluid motion, he lunged toward the tactical team leader, grabbing for the man's radio. "Elena, run!" he shouted, even as 3 weapons swung toward him. The gunshots were deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. David's body jerked as the bullets found him, but his momentum carried him forward, his hand closing on the radio's transmit button. Elena screamed his name and started toward him, but Jackson grabbed her arm, holding her back. She watched in horror as David hit the ground, blood spreading across his chest, the radio clutched in his dying grasp. "David, no?" Elena fought against Jackson's grip, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't leave me." David's eyes found hers across the barn, and with his last breath, he pressed the transmit button. The radio crackled with static, then silence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then David smiled, and Elena realized he hadn't triggered the explosives in Albania. He triggered something much closer to home. Charges hidden throughout the barn detonated in sequence, turning the old building into a maelstrom of fire and collapsing timber. Elena felt Jackson tackle her to the ground as the world exploded around them, felt the heat of the flames on her face, felt the crushing weight of her own grief as the man who'd saved her life paid the ultimate price for both their freedoms. Through the smoke and chaos, she heard Marcus screaming orders, heard the tactical teams trying to regroup, heard the helicopter circling overhead like a mechanical vulture. But she also heard something else. The distant wail of sirens growing, closer by the second. David's final gift hadn't just been the explosion. It had been a beacon, a signal that would bring every law enforcement agency in 3 states down on Marcus Hartford and his conspiracy. As Jackson pulled her toward a gap in the burning wall, Elena made a silent promise to the man bleeding out. In the flames behind her, the drives would be released. The evidence would be revealed. The consortium would fall. Even if it cost her everything she had left to lose. 6 months later, Elena stood in the marble lobby of the federal courthouse in Manhattan, watching Marcus Hartford III being led away in handcuffs. The cameras flashed like lightning, capturing every angle of his downfall, but Elena felt no satisfaction. In his humiliation, victory tasted like ash when it came at such a price. The trial had lasted 8 weeks. 8 weeks of testimony, evidence, and revelation that had brought down not just Marcus and the consortium, but half the political establishment of the Eastern Seaboard. Elena's encrypted drives had contained everything she'd promised and more. Construction contracts rigged to fail. Political campaigns funded with blood money. Children's hospitals built with materials that crumbled under stress. "It's over," said Agent Sarah Chen, the FBI prosecutor who'd become Elena's unlikely ally. Yes, the same Sarah Chen who'd been Marcus's mistress, who'd approached the FBI with her own evidence when she realized what kind of man she'd been sleeping with. The last of the consortium leadership was sentenced this morning. 25 to life, no parole. Elena nodded but said nothing. Through the courthouse windows, she could see protesters gathered on the steps, some demanding justice for the victims, others claiming the prosecutions were politically motivated. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the complicated space between. "Have you thought about what you're going to do now?" Sarah asked gently. "The witness protection offer still stands. New identity, clean start, somewhere far from all this." "Already died once," Elena replied. "I'm not sure I have the energy to do it again." The truth was more complicated than that. Elena had spent the last 6 months testifying in closed sessions, her identity protected by court order, watching from the shadows as her evidence destroyed lives both guilty and innocent. Her father's construction company had collapsed when its connections to the consortium were revealed. Her mother had suffered a stroke from the stress. Her younger brother had dropped out of law school because he couldn't afford tuition anymore. The cost of justice had been higher than she'd ever imagined. "There's something else," Sarah said, hesitating. "Something we haven't told you about, David." Elena's blood chilled. She'd spent 6 months trying not to think about David, trying not to remember the way he'd smiled as he died, trying not to dream about storm-colored eyes and gentle hands. What about him? He didn't die in that barn. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She reached for the nearest wall, her legs suddenly unsteady. "What did you say?" The explosion threw him clear. Severe injuries, massive blood loss, but he survived. He's been in federal protection this whole time. Recovering and providing testimony about his family's operations in the Baltic, Elena stared at Sarah, unable to process what she was hearing. "He's alive, very much alive, and asking to see you." The world tilted sideways. Elena felt tears she'd been holding back for 6 months finally break free, streaming down her face without shame or restraint. David was alive. The man who'd sacrificed everything to save her was alive. "Where is he?" "Safe house in Vermont, about 3 hours from here." Sarah's voice grew serious. "You should know that his family is gone. Explosions in Albania. Worked exactly as he planned. The Volkov shipping empire no longer exists. He's free, but he's also alone in the world." Elena understood what Sarah wasn't saying. David had chosen justice over family, just as she had. They were both orphans now, cut loose from everything they'd once believed in, connected only to each other. "Take me to him," Elena said. The drive to Vermont passed in a blur of autumn colors and racing heartbeat. Elena's hand shook as Sarah pulled up to a small farmhouse nestled in the mountains, its windows glowing warm yellow against the gathering dusk. After 6 months of believing David was dead, the possibility of seeing him again felt like stepping back into a dream. She'd given up on. Sarah remained in the car as Elena walked up the gravel path to the front door. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if he'd changed? What if the injuries had altered him beyond recognition? What if he blamed her for the choices that had cost them both everything? The door opened before she could knock. David stood in the doorway, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. He was thinner than she remembered, with new scars visible along his jawline and disappearing beneath his shirt collar. But his eyes were the same storm-colored gray, and they lit up when they saw her with such joy that Elena felt her heart stutter back to life. "Elena," he said, her false name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "Actually," she said, stepping closer, "it's Vivian. Vivian Cross. I thought you should know my real name." "Vivian," he repeated, testing the syllables. "It suits you better than Elena ever did." They stood there for a moment, drinking in the sight of each other, afraid to move closer in case the dream shattered. Then David reached out, his hand gentle against her cheek, and Vivian felt the last of her defenses crumble. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I thought about letting you believe that," David replied. "Thought it might be easier for you to move on if you didn't know I survived, but I couldn't let you carry that guilt when the choice was mine to make." "What choice?" David stepped back, and Vivian could see the weight of everything he'd lost in the lines around his eyes. "The choice to burn it all down. My family, your family, everyone who profited from other people's misery. I knew what would happen when I triggered those explosives, knew it would destroy innocent people along with the guilty. But I also knew it was the only way to stop them." Vivian understood. The same choice she'd made when she stole those drives. Knowing it would destroy her father's company, along with the consortium. The terrible mathematics of justice, where sometimes you had to break good people to stop evil ones. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "We're both ghosts, David. Both cut off from everything we used to be." David smiled, and for the first time in 6 months, Vivian saw hope in his eyes. "We start over. Together. No false names, no hidden identities, no running from the past. Just us, and whatever we can build from the ashes. It won't be easy. The families we destroyed, the people we hurt, they won't just forgive and forget." "No," David agreed. "But we're not the same people who walked into that diner 6 months ago. We're stronger now. Scarred, but stronger." He took her hands in his, and Vivian felt the calluses on his palms, the evidence of hard work and harder. "Choices. I love you, Vivian Cross. I loved you when I thought your name was Elena, and I love you now that I know who you really are. I love your courage and your stubbornness and the way you chose justice, even when it cost you everything." "I love you too," she whispered, and the words felt like coming home after a long exile. "I love that you sacrificed everything for people you'd never met. You chose to do the right thing even when it destroyed your world." They kissed then, soft and tentative at first, then with the desperate hunger of two people who'd been given an impossible second chance. When they finally broke apart, Vivian rested her forehead against David's chest and felt his heartbeat. Strong and steady and real. "We should go inside," David said quietly. "Sarah's probably getting tired of waiting in the car." Vivian laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. She can wait a little longer." They stood there on the porch as darkness fell around them. Two broken people finding wholeness in each other. Two ghosts learning to be human again. In the distance, Vivian could hear the sound of cars on the highway, people heading home too. Families and lives and normal problems. She and David would never have that kind of normal. They would always be the people who'd burned down empires and paid the price for justice. But maybe that was enough. Maybe love was enough to build something new from the ruins of everything they'd lost. "Come on," David said finally, leading her toward the door. "I want to show you something." Inside the farmhouse, the walls were covered with architectural drawings. Not blueprints for buildings, but plans for something much more ambitious. Schools, hospitals, community centers, all designed to be built with honest materials by workers paid fair wages. "I've been thinking about what we could do next," David said. "Your expertise in construction law, my knowledge of international shipping and logistics. We could build something good, Vivian. Something that helps people instead of exploiting them." Vivian studied the drawings, seeing in them not just buildings but a future she'd never dared to imagine. A chance to use their hard-won knowledge. For creation instead of destruction. "It would take years," she said. "We have years. It would be dangerous. The people we've exposed, They have long memories. Let them remember. Let them see what happens when you choose conscience over profit.
Gideon?
Turned to face David, seeing in his eyes the same fire that had made him choose death over dishonor in that burning barn. But now it was tempered with something else. Hope. Love. The possibility of redemption. "Where do we start?" she asked. David's smile was radiant with the foundation. Everything good starts with a solid foundation. Outside, the Vermont mountains stood silent and eternal under a canopy of stars. Inside the farmhouse, two people who'd lost everything began to plan for a future built on love and second chances and the hard-earned wisdom that comes from surviving your own mistakes. They would face challenges. Former enemies would hunt them. Old wounds would take years to heal. They would face it all together, two hearts beating as one. Two souls bound by the choices that had nearly destroyed them and ultimately set them free. In the end, that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. Asterisk, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more intense romance stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The end.